We are wrapping up our last week of a series called Courage, where we've been studying the life of Moses. And if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and turn to Deuteronomy chapter 4. That's where we're going to be camping out this morning. If you don't have a Bible, the text will be on the screen. And so while you're turning there, when I was in high school, I played a lot of volleyball. Art, if you wouldn't mind, if you could just close that back door, that'd be great. Thank you. I played a lot of volleyball. I just would eat, drink, sleep, volleyball. That was all I did. And my volleyball coach still to this day is one of the top 5 influential women in my life. And something I remember that she would always do is that she would gather our team right before any match that we would play, and she would kind of give us this motivational speech. And she would elevate the moment, no matter who we were going to play. If it was a team that we would just crush, or if it was like a really difficult team that we were about to play, and she would kind of huddle us together, and she would say something like, "All right, ladies, today's the day. Today's the day that you show off your long week of practices. Today's the day where you show off how you've improved in serve receive. Today's the day where you learn what it looks like to overcome your mistakes, to pick one another up, to learn what it's like to just continue to perform even in the midst of adversity. Today's the day. There won't be another match like today." And then she would gather us together, and we would huddle up, and we would put our right hand on the left shoulder of our teammate and our left hand in, and she would say, "We are," and we'd say, "One," and then we'd go and we'd play the match. And so for some of you, maybe you didn't grow up playing sports, but you know what it's like to be motivated by someone. Maybe it was your choir director. Maybe it is your boss before you're about to go in to close on a big business deal. Maybe it was your mom or dad dropping you off at your first day of college. And if the person is delivering that motivational speech correctly, they're gonna elevate the significance of the moment. They're gonna say something like the great theologian Eminem once said, that you've got one shot or one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted in one moment. And in Deuteronomy chapter 4, Moses takes this opportunity. It has been 40 years since the Israelites had left Egypt, and the people are camped out on the east side of the Jordan, on the threshold of the promised land. And Moses needed to prepare the new generation of what they were about to experience. And he needed to elevate the significance of the moment. And he begins this motivational sermon by starting off by saying, "Has anything ever happened like this before?" So let's read Deuteronomy chapter 4, starting in verse 32. He says, "Ask now about the former days long before your time, from the day God created human beings on the earth. Ask from one end of the heavens to the other. Has anything so great as this ever happened, or has anything like it ever been heard of? Has any other people heard the voice of God speaking out of fire as you have and lived? Has any God ever tried to take for himself one nation out of another nation by testings, by signs and wonders, by war, by a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, or by great and awesome deeds like all the things the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? You were shown these things so that you might know that the Lord is God. Besides him, there is no other. From heaven, he made you hear his voice to discipline you. On earth, he showed you his great fire and you heard his words from out of the fire. Because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you, and to bring you into their land, to give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God. In heaven above and on the earth below, there is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land the Lord your God gives you for all time. Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds exactly like Eminem's #1 song of the year, Lose Yourself. But it is a little bit different. Moses, like any great communicator, spent some time talking about what has happened in the past, where the Israelites have been, where God has shown up for them, how God has delivered them, how God has been faithful to their ancestors and is going to be faithful to them. And he takes this current moment and he leads it up to a decision. Are they going to be like their ancestors and be disobedient, or are they going to trust God with their lives and obey? And what's really interesting, and what is really the most persuasive aspect of this sermon and the beginning of a series of sermons throughout Deuteronomy, is that Moses is telling a narrative of God's love. And it is a love that is unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. We live in a culture that is obsessed with love. And all you have to do is Google, like I did this past week, of all of the popular reality TV shows about love. You can take a look at the screen and see that there's a slide. There's Love is Blind, Love Island, Are You the One?, Married at First Sight, 90 Day Fiancé, The 7-Year Switch, Temptation Island, which sounds dangerous, Indian matchmaking, and I actually have watched Jewish matchmaking, okay? It's actually pretty good. And of course, let's just not forget the show that brings in $86 million in advertising revenue alone, which is, everybody with me, it is called The Bachelor, yes. And, before all of the men are rolling their eyes in the room, thinking that I'm only talking to the women, there is also a series of bromances that we cannot deny, okay? You just look at movies like Remember the Titans or Miracle or Hoosiers, or TV shows like Ted Lasso or Scrubs or How I Met Your Mother, and I would bet that some of you have shed a tear in some of those movies or TV shows. We are a people who loves love. But the love of God that Moses describes in Deuteronomy 4 is unique. There's nothing like it. And it's unique because, as he communicates, it's a love that rescues. God rescued the Israelites by appearing to Moses in the burning bush, calling him to deliver the Egyptians from slavery, parting the Red Sea, showing them forgiveness even when they were disobedient, establishing a covenant with them. And when they ran, he continued to run after them. I wonder, do you know what it's like to be rescued? In the glorious Chester County that we live in, a lot of our needs are met. I was watching a video recently about Chester County, and it talked about Chester County being one of the wealthiest, healthiest, most educated counties in Pennsylvania. And because so many of our material needs are met, I think we can struggle to know the areas that we are in need of rescue. The Harvard Business Review came out with an article last year called "Why It's So Hard to Ask for Help." And the writer gave a number of reasons based off of research, but there were two that I wanted to point out. One was we fear being vulnerable. That's why it's so hard for us to ask for help. And the second one was we need to be independent. And the article describes vulnerability feeling like a sign of weakness and that we don't want to look incompetent or inferior. And what's interesting is the same year that that article was written was the same year that the Surgeon General released a report called "The Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, Healing Effects of Social Connection and Community." And you may have heard Mark or I talk about this over the past couple months. And what's interesting about this report, which I really encourage reading all of it if you have some time. But one of the things that was so fascinating is it said that the social engagement with friends in the United States has decreased by 20 hours per month. And I can't help but wonder if our decrease of social engagement is correlated with our fear of being vulnerable and our desire to be independent. Because the truth is that we desperately need to be rescued from loneliness, but we are unwilling to ask for help. We don't recognize our need to be rescued. We don't ask for help, and we are the most lonely that we have ever been, than ever before. A while ago, I was in the Trader Joe's parking lot, just facing a little bit of loneliness, which happens to all of us. So I sent a Marco Polo to a friend, which Marco Polo is like a video platform where you send a video to a friend. And so I just kind of shared with her what was going on. And I can assure you it was not Trader Joe's fault, okay, because TJ and I are like this. And so I decided that I was going to go into Trader Joe's and be comforted by the floral section. And I'm in there just for a couple of minutes, and all of a sudden, I feel my phone vibrate. And the friend I had just Marco Polo'd, she said, "I'm in the Giant parking lot feeling the same way." And she is in a completely different stage of life than me, married with 3 kids, and I just can't help but wonder, man, if God's just waiting for us, just take these little steps of vulnerability. And God's just waiting for us, for him to be able to swoop in and rescue us. Do you know how seen by God I felt in that moment? See, God's waiting for us to recognize our need to be rescued so that he can be the hero. Colossians 1:13 says, "For he has rescued us from the dominion of darkness and brought us into the kingdom of the Son he loves." You know, why I love serving in kids ministry is just how honest the kids are. Some of the elementary parents in the room are starting to get afraid as I'm saying this, but don't worry, what is said in kids ministry stays in kids ministry, okay? But so the other day, I will say this, a couple of months ago, we were talking about just some things that we fear, like what we're afraid of. And so I was asking the kids, like, what are some things that you're afraid of? And 90% of them said that they were afraid of the dark. And I don't know what it is about getting older, but if you're like me, you can't go to sleep unless you're wearing an eye mask, you have blackout curtains, and if I dream of the sun, I'm like wide awake, okay? But kids are like, I'm not made for darkness. Like I am not made to live in darkness. And there's something so holy about that. That kids early on know that they're made to be rescued from darkness, rescued from loneliness, rescued from sin. Do you recognize your need to be rescued? Secondly, Moses shares the uniqueness of God's love, of a love that rescues, but also a love that chooses you. Verse 37, because he loved your ancestors and chose their descendants after them, he brought you out of Egypt by his presence and his great strength to drive out before you nations greater and stronger than you and to bring you into their land, give it to you for your inheritance as it is today. Moses is saying, hey, look how God loved your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He has that same love for you. He has that same love for you. It's a generational love. Some of you know this already, but at Christmas, I found out that I'm going to be an aunt. I'm very excited. And, some people keep announcements semi-private, understandably so, just because of the risks involved and everything. The Short family has no concept of waiting, okay? So it's like my brother and sister-in-law are like, we're pregnant, it's a girl, her name is Elsie, okay? Like everyone knows. And so her due date is August 29th, in case anyone wants to mark their calendars. And so I can't tell you how much knowing her name has created such a strong bond between me already. I have unleashed all of the Amazon wish lists for aunt merchandise. I'm very excited. And so partly though, because I know her name, she's named after my Irish grandmother who died my senior year in high school. And my Irish grandmother was just an amazing woman. She came to the States at 36, met my grandfather, got married at 38, had my mom at 40, had my aunt at 42. I mean, just an amazing woman. And she's very poised, and there are things that she just, how she grew up, there are things that she just chose to do, and she didn't understand why other people didn't do those things. She was, very traditional. I remember one time my mom told my grandmother that we were going to go to the movies on a Sunday, and my Irish grandmother looks at her and she's like, oh, Patricia, you can't go to the movies on a Sunday? Listen, that is the best Irish accent I can do, okay? So it's never going to happen again. And so there's just, every time I see a sonogram, I think of my grandmother, and I think of just the legacy and the heritage. And so Jeremiah, 1:5 says, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And Moses is saying here that the God of the universe knows you. He knows this generation. He knows you, Israelites, each one of you. He's named you. He knows you. Love is a decision. And some of us have forgotten that Christ has chosen us, and not only has he chosen us, but he continues to choose us. And maybe for some of us, we are limiting our relationship with Christ to this one, church camp experience, which I don't want to invalidate or minimize those profound experiences, but our relationship with Christ is meant to be ongoing. The covenantal relationship on this earth that is meant to reflect the covenantal relationship of God is the marriage, that God's covenantal love between him and his bride is reflected in a husband's love for his wife. And while a marriage ceremony is a sacred moment, it is not enough to sustain the marriage. It's a formal ceremony where two people commit with God and to one another the choice to love, but it must continue for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, for sickness and in health, till death do us part, to love and to cherish till death do us part. Our obsession with love is because we were made to be loved, and we were made to love. And even the marriage, even the sanctity of marriage, while it's a representation of Christ's love for us, is no match for God's love for us, that he chose us, that he made a covenant with us, that he continues to choose us. His love rescues us. His love chooses us. And the question is just, how are we to respond? very simply, our response is that we love him. We love him back. And this is what Moses is saying, verse 39, acknowledge and take to heart this day that the Lord is God in heaven above and on earth below. There is no other. Keep his decrees and commands, which I am giving you today, so that it may go well with you and your children after you, and that you may live long in the land that your God gives you for all time. The way we respond to his love is we have the courage to love him back. We love him by obeying him. We love him by trusting him. Listen, you know what's so interesting? Every other religion says that you must keep the law to be saved. But Christianity says Jesus saved. And our response to him saving us is to trust him with our obedience to what he says in his word. John 3:16 says, for God, a very popular verse, for God so loved the world that whoever believes in him will not perish but have eternal life. Verse 17, for God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but to save the world through him. Every other religion, there is a hope at the end of your life that if the good outweighs the bad, if I just do enough good things, then I will earn my salvation. But Christianity, the good news is that you will never be good enough. There is nothing that you could ever do that could earn a relationship with God. And so that's why Jesus had to come as the true Moses. Moses was the mediator between God and the Israelites, and Moses failed. That's why he couldn't enter the promised land. And so Jesus, it's a foreshadowing because Jesus is the only one who could keep the law. He's the only one who could be the true mediator. That's why we celebrate Easter, is because it's this representation that the Israelites continued to fail over and over again, and God continued to be faithful, and you and I will continue to fail, and God will continue to rescue us and continue to choose us and continue to love us. But you know, what causes me great sadness, and I know it does for you too, is when I sit across the table from someone who is not a Christian, and they say to me something like, you know, I was actually interested in Christianity, and I started looking into it, and maybe they went as far as to look into the archaeological evidence. Is Jesus who he said he is? But you know what? Then they say, you know, but I started hanging out with Christians, and they just didn't seem very genuine. They didn't seem really like they loved God. And I just can't help but wonder, do we look so much like the world that our lives are just unimpressive? That someone is just begging for us to be genuine. And Moses is saying here, what if the way we loved, what if this generation, the way that we loved God was different? And people were like, have you seen anything like this before? Have you seen the way he loves his wife? Have you seen the way they parent their kids? Have you seen the type of friend she is? Have you seen how they serve the poor? How they give financially, how they talk about people, how they don't talk about people. It's so radical. So radical. Have you seen it? Our lives don't bring in $86 million in advertising revenue, but they're meant to be a love story of that, man, the way that God loves me, I can't not love him back. St. Augustine says, to fall in love with God is the greatest romance. To seek him, the greatest adventure to find him, the greatest human achievement. We are beginning what is known in the church calendar as Holy Week. And, we are used to ordering our lives around seasons: winter, spring, summer, fall. But in the early church, they ordered their calendars around the redemption of Christ, his death, burial, and resurrection. And today begins that week. It's Palm Sunday. And this is the day that crowds were waiting for Jesus as he rode in on a donkey, and they waved palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is the King of Israel." But what's really interesting is those same people who came to say Hosanna in the highest just a few days later were yelling, "Crucify him." But you know what? The kind of God we serve is a God who still sent his son, and Jesus still died for them. And he still died for you, and he still died for me, for our sins past, present, and future. Have you responded? Have you chosen to love him back? For some of you, maybe you trusted Jesus and you had this really profound experience at camp, but if you're honest, you had a formal ceremony, but it really hasn't been enough to sustain the relationship, and it's not God's doing, because God, once he establishes a covenant, he never breaks it. But if you're honest, it was kind of a one-time thing, and your life hasn't been reflective of acknowledging him. And for others of you, maybe you've been trying to be a good person and control things, and you're just kind of hoping that at the end of your life that you will be good enough, that you will make it. But the truth of Christianity is that you will never be good enough. What if today you said, "Jesus, I need you. Jesus, I need you to rescue me from my sin"? He already chose you. What if today was unlike any other day? God's word says in Romans 10 that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. And we're about to take communion together. And what I love about the fact that we're taking communion as we go into Holy Week is it's a response to God's love for us. And we're going to take it together in just a few minutes, and then we're going to sing a song that says, that talks about Jesus having it all. And it's a response to those two questions of maybe for you, you're ready to recommit your relationship with Christ, and God's just ready. He's waiting for you. And for others of you, maybe it's that you're ready to commit for the very first time, and there aren't any fancy words. It's more of a posture of your heart of saying, "God, I need you. God, forgive me of my sins. Take control of my life. Today I choose to follow you." So at this time, the band's going to play, and then y'all can go ahead and get up and grab the elements and come back to your seat, and in just a few moments, we'll take communion.